house. And I think the most important thing is to be aware that you have them. I've overcome several of them. I used to be very nervous, think they were dangerous. I think that we have a tendency to make them not like ourselves. And then I had the tendency to go the other way and to not hold them accountable for anything. And I think what I have to constantly be aware of is that I do have these biases, I do have stereotypes, and I need to keep challenging myself to make sure that I'm seeing a real person and not an idea or a stereotype.
Welcome back. I wonder if you had any thoughts about the clip, the student who just shared a couple of important concepts, things like seeing them as people and holding them accountable.
Well, the statistics are that the mentally ill have no more tendency towards criminal activities or violent acts than general population. It's about the same. There have been some fairly in-depth studies to that. It's just that they tend to maybe not groom quite so well. They may walk a little stiffly or something like that. And if you talk with them, depending on the level of their illness and their, the efficacy of their treatment, they may have some problems with talking, but they certainly make complete sentences, and they do their best to try to act like normal people.
Well, and then again, acting like normal people may not be the best option.
Well, there's some options that are not that good in the normal population. That's true.
Yeah. Now tell me about AMI, the Alliance for the Mentally Ill. Now, you're currently the president. Were you there when the alliance began, or?
No, I wasn't. It began around 1970, about the time that the state hospitals were closing down, and like quite a few mentally ill people were coming back to the area. Actually, I talked to a psychiatrist at Napa who was a historian there, and he said, strangely enough, or unbelievably enough at this point, that one psychotic episode was sufficient for you to go to state hospital like Napa.
Wow.
And that if you didn't make a recovery in a few months, you probably would stay there for life. And definitely if you were released because you did recover, but you came back a second time, you stayed there for life. That was the expectation, 50 years ago, and up until about 1970. At that time, a couple of medications for the bipolar and for schizophrenia became available, and there was a lot of optimism this would solve all the problems. Right. And they started putting the people out of the state hospitals down to the community, like you were saying, oftentimes without sufficient funding and planning for accommodating them in the community. So it's been a struggle since then. What started the Alliance for Mentally Ill was families were given back the burden of taking care of their loved ones if there wasn't community care, and they met at psychiatric facilities and counseling facilities and so forth, and they began to realize they had common problems and that they should really share their information, their experience, and see if they could work together. So that actually started, and some people indicate initially in San Mateo County, and it was very shortly after that there was a Santa Clara chapter of volunteers, concerned people established. I got involved after I retired as an engineer. We had one member of our family, child, at 26 become ill, and my wife was very involved. I was still working, but since I've been retired, I've found another career working for Alliance for Mentally Ill. It's an organization here in Santa Clara County of about 500 people. It's about 400 family members. Some are single family members, some are, husband and wife. And so it comes out to around 500. And we have general information meetings once a month. We have smaller, intimate groups where people can share personal concerns and learn more personally what they can do about their problems or help other people with similar problems. And we put out a newsletter. We publish about 600 copies each month of a monthly newsletter. Send it out to our membership. It's also available to people who hear about us. We send them copies. And we also send out some public relations copies, like to the newspapers and other things.
So in many ways, your population or your group would be very highly educated people. In fact, there's probably members
Highly experienced,
and
anyway.
experience. Well,
Yeah.
I guess I'm thinking educated in the reality of
That's right.
working with mental illness
Right.
in one capacity or another.
Sure.
Let's take a look at a couple more myths that you can dispel for us. Mental disorder is associated with fundamental personal weakness, and so its occurrence is shameworthy, and that mental illness is necessary for creativity. Now, that last one, I know, has certainly been, when we look at some of the great painters and musicians in history, people think, well, yes, they were mentally ill and they needed to be in order to be creative.
To see things differently.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, there is some of that, but and also in the bipolar illness, where they go from being very depressed to being very exhilarated and not needing to sleep and so on. There have been composers that, wrote whole operas and so forth while they were in a manic state.
Yeah.
But it's not the best way to do it, and there are a lot of people who just do these things without being mentally ill, that's for sure. And as far as having other, aspects of being a weak character, that's really not true. It takes tremendous character to survive with this illness. There's a fairly high incidence of suicide in the first, few months or years of being severely mentally ill. And the survivors are the people who have strong character.
That is an excellent point. I mean, when I think about disability in general, how difficult it is to go into acceptance and be willing to accommodate your reality and is part of your lifestyle, and to not spend all of your energy fighting that reality, energy that you could be using and actually being productive and enjoying your life.
Right.
Yes.
And with the new medications and some community support and accepting that they need to work on their illness and whatever strengths they have, why, there's many of them do quite well. They work, pay taxes. One of the myths that we find is, particularly in those days where taxpayers don't want to pay any taxes, is that mental illness is extremely expensive and it really shouldn't be supported. But the problem is that if they don't provide any preventive, stabilization care, then people wind up in the hospital or in jail for periods, or recycling. Yeah. And like this gentleman on the first clip you had, he trying to keep him in a community on a crisis basis is very expensive. Okay. And it's much better to do the things that Santa Clara County is trying to do to avoid the high cost end of it, and also for the personal involvement of the people, all the crisis and bad experiences that they have are reduced a great deal.
So really we're looking at maintenance level care as much as possible. In fact, isn't there an organization called Community Companions, I think, who go out into the community?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, they were actually started by the Mental Health Association, which actually predated NAMI a little bit.
Okay.
And they have been very good at this effort. They have not been strong in having housing for the mentally ill. They're more reach out into the community and find people in the community. There's just now a move afoot by an organization that was started by our organization called Perma Housing, and they're going to join together. At least the leaders of those two have agreed to try to merge their organizations to get a larger and more complete capability for care of people in the community.
Okay.
That's just happening.
That's wonderful news, isn't it? All right, let's take a look at a couple more myths. Okay, mental illness is never completely cured, and mental illness could never happen to me. Those were the last two that I had prepared. In terms of never being cured, what kind of experience do you have in your group with this?
Well, it's a biological brain disorder with chemical imbalances of one type or another. I think the newer medications are getting, better and better at creating a good balance. But in general, the objective is, as with any disability, residual disability that might exist, is to try to have the person recover enough to function at whatever the highest level is with their disability. And so it's not quite like the typical older medical model where you come to the hospital, they fix your broken arm, and you go away, and it's fixed, okay? It's more like diabetes or heart disease or other serious illnesses that can't be completely returned to its original condition, usually.
Okay.
Although there are some forms, these things are, all biological things are quite a spread. It's not black and white, and so there are some people that have some slight disability and they get helped sufficiently that unless you knew them before, you probably wouldn't recognize they had a disability.
Okay. That actually brings me up to one of the final points I wanted to ask you about, which is one of the complaints about the treatment of mental illness is over-medication. While medication is very useful for stabilizing, have you ever seen that happen with your
Oh yeah,
experience?
there's a lot of it. The older medications tend to have some rather bad side effects.
Okay.
And so it's a trade-off between what good they do for a person against maybe the stiffness or stomach problems or other things that are side effects of these medications. You have to adjust them. People vary a lot. Again, biologically, we're all different. The newer medications have fewer side effects. That's part of their improvement.
Okay, so that's one. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay. The newer medications not only do a better primary job, but they have much less secondary unwanted effects.
I want to thank you for taking time out to be with me today. I want to thank you for joining us. In the upcoming weeks, we'll learn about pet therapy and breast cancer recovery. I'm Mary Crocker Cook. Good night.